Victor Langston laughed when Amara Hayes stepped onto the stage, a church girl with no training, no name, and no place in his world. He stopped her before she could play a single note. But what Victor didn't know, Amara wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there because she heard something he didn't. And when she finally touches the keys again, the truth will shake everything he built. If this moment gave you chills, don't scroll past. Share the story and drop your city in the comments so your voice becomes part of it. A cold winter evening wrapped Belmont Hall in amber light, the air crisp and expectant, as if even silence had been rehearsed. Victor Langston stood at center stage, tall, silver-haired, early 50s, a world-renowned pianist known for flawless performances and a reputation that tolerated no mistakes. Years ago, one public failure had nearly ended his career, and since then, perfection had become his shield and his weapon. He scanned the finalist list. Amara Hayes, he paused. No formal training, plays at New Mercy Church. A quiet laugh slipped from his lips, thin but sharp enough to echo through the microphone. Church, Victor repeated softly. How fitting. A few people in the audience shifted. Some smiled. Others avoided eye contact. In the third row sat Amara Hayes, 16, slim, dark-skinned, wearing a worn navy dress carefully pressed. Orphaned at 9 and raised by her grandmother, she had learned piano not through lessons, but through listening. Hours in a small church, memorizing sound instead of reading it. She didn't react. Victor looked up, already decided. You, blue dress, come up. Amara stood, her chest tightened, not from fear, but from something heavier, familiar, the quiet weight of being judged before being heard. She walked down the aisle. The Steinway grand piano waited under the spotlight, polished to perfection, reflecting the lights like glass. Around her, other contestants watched, some curious, some relieved it wasn't them. Victor stepped aside, one hand gesturing casually. Go ahead, play something. He crossed his arms, waiting. Amara sat at the bench. The keys felt different from the ones she knew. Too smooth, too perfect. She rested her hands for a second, then lifted them slowly, letting her fingers hover. For a moment the hall disappeared. She saw her grandmother's living room, the old piano, the uneven notes, the way sound didn't have to be perfect to be true. Don't chase the sound, her grandmother used to say. Let it come to you. Amara lowered her hands. Her fingers touched the keys, and then stopped. Not from fear, from something else. Something wrong. It was subtle, almost invisible. A slight tension in the tone, a note that didn't sit where it should. The kind of imperfection most people would never notice. But she heard it, clear, exact, unavoidable. She pressed one key lightly, then another, listening, not performing. Behind her, Victor's voice cut in, smooth but impatient. Well? Amara didn't answer. She pressed a chord. There it was again, a small misalignment, a fraction off, like a perfect sentence with one word out of place. She inhaled. Enough. Victor raised his hand. The word came before the music. A few soft chuckles followed, scattered across the room, filling the silence that should have belonged to her. Amara lifted her hands, stood, no argument, no explanation, just quiet. She stepped away from the piano, the spotlight still holding her in place for a second too long. As she walked back down, the whispers followed, soft, certain, already forming conclusions. But inside her, something shifted. Not broken, aligned, because in that unfinished moment, before she was stopped, Amara Hayes had heard something no one else in that room had. The piano was slightly out of tune, and the man who built his life on perfection hadn't noticed. On the far side of Memphis, where the sidewalks were cracked and the streetlights buzzed like tired insects, Amara Hayes returned home with Belmont Hall still echoing inside her chest. The house she shared with her grandmother was small and weathered, its paint faded, its porch leaning slightly to one side, as if the years had settled unevenly into the wood. Cold air slipped through the window frames in winter, and the heater complained more than it worked. Yet inside that house stood the one object Amara trusted more than anything else in the world. An old, upright piano with chipped varnish, yellowing keys, and 2 stubborn notes in the upper register that stuck when the weather turned damp. Lillian Hayes was waiting at the kitchen table when Amara stepped in. She was 72, thin, soft-spoken, with silver hair pinned neatly back and hands roughened by decades of work, first as a hospital cleaner, then as a hotel laundress, and finally as whatever else life demanded. Hard years had not made her bitter. They had made her careful. She could hear a lie in a pause and pain in the way a plate was set down. When Amara entered without speaking, Lillian looked up from her tea and knew immediately that something had happened. "Well," she said gently, "did they hear you?" Amara stood still for a moment, coat still on, fingers cold around the strap of her bag. "No, ma'am," she said. "He didn't let me play." Lillian's face did not change right away. That was her way. The hurt came first to her eyes, then the anger, and only then the sadness. Amara told her everything. Victor Langston's laugh, the way he had said the word church like it meant smallness, the audience turning to look, the hand raised before she could begin. She even repeated his tone, flat and polished, which somehow made it worse. Lillian listened without interrupting, but when Amara finally mentioned the piano, her grandmother leaned forward. "You touched it?" "Yes, ma'am." "And?" Amara hesitated. "It was off, slightly. 1 note in the middle register, not enough for most people to hear." "But you heard it?" Amara nodded. Lillian sat back slowly, one hand tightening around the teacup. For a long second, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then she rose, walked to the piano in the living room, and lifted the fallboard with the kind of care some people reserve for prayer. "Play me middle D," she said. Amara obeyed. Then the D above it, then the F sharp. Lillian closed her eyes as if measuring not the sound itself, but what it meant. She had seen this before, years ago, in another pair of hands. "Your mother used to do that," she said at last. Amara looked up. Her mother's memory lived in the house like winter light, always present, never warm enough to hold. She had been only 9 when the accident happened, but she still remembered a laugh, a perfume, a hand brushing dust from piano keys. "You never told me that." "I never told you a lot of things," Lillian gave a tired smile, "not because I wanted secrets. Because some truths wait until they're needed." She motioned for Amara to sit beside her. "Your mother, Celeste, heard music different from other people, not louder, not prettier, truer. She could catch a note, leaning where it didn't belong. She once stopped a church rehearsal because the tenor section had drifted sharp by less than a breath. Everybody thought she was imagining it until the organist checked. She was right." Lillian looked down at her own hands. People praised that gift when it entertained them. They feared it when it exposed them. Amara felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the draft in the room. "What do you mean?" Lillian's mouth tightened. She was choosing her words the way someone steps over broken glass. "I mean, some musicians love beauty, and some love the power that comes from deciding what beauty is. Those are not the same thing." She turned and fixed Amara with a steady gaze. "A man like Victor Langston has spent years being treated like the final word in every room he enters. Men like that do not laugh because something is funny. They laugh because they want the room to learn where to stand." The old piano waited beside them, quiet and battered and honest. Amara placed her fingers on the keys and played a simple chord, then another. On this instrument, nothing was hidden. The weaknesses were part of its voice. She had grown up inside that truth. A wrong note did not offend her. It introduced itself. A cracked tone did not shame her. It told her where to listen. Belmont's gleaming Steinway had been another world entirely, polished, expensive, worshipped. Yet beneath all that shine, it had still betrayed itself to her in a single flawed vibration. A knock came at the door a few minutes later. It was Brother Malcolm Reed, the church's piano tuner, a broad-shouldered man in his late 60s, with tobacco-stained fingers and the patient manner of someone who had repaired old things for so long he no longer expected them to be easy. A factory closure 20 years earlier had cost him his first career and stripped the pride from his voice for a long time. Ever since, he spoke gently to people and stubbornly to instruments. He had come to drop off a hymnal Lillian had left behind after Sunday service. But when he saw Amara at the piano, he asked her to play while he listened. She played 3 notes, then paused. "The A is flat," she said quietly. "Not by much." Brother Malcolm frowned, took out a tuning fork, checked, then looked back at her with his brows lifted. "30 cents low," he murmured. "Close enough to make me mad." Lillian didn't smile. "Tell her," she said. Brother Malcolm looked at Amara for a long moment before speaking. "Child, there's hearing and there's hearing. Most folks can tell when music is wrong. A few can tell exactly how wrong. That kind of ear can open doors." He hesitated, rubbing his thumb over the fork. "It can also make enemies." After he left, the house felt smaller somehow. Amara sat at the piano long after the room had gone dim. She thought of Victor's raised hand, of the laugh sliding through the microphone, of a perfect stage built around a flawed instrument. And for the first time, beneath the humiliation, she felt something sharper than hurt begin to form. Not revenge, not yet, just attention, the kind that waits quietly in the dark until the truth makes a sound. Before going to bed, Lillian stopped in the doorway and said, very softly, "Some people play to be admired. Some play to hide what they are. Listen carefully, baby. Men like that always leave something out of tune." By midweek, the clip had found its way into every hallway, every phone, every quiet corner that had once ignored Amara Hayes, and now her name moved like a rumor that didn't know whether to laugh or whisper. At school, lockers slammed a little louder when she passed. Conversations bent around her presence. And even the teachers, who had once seen her as invisible, now looked at her with that careful, distant curiosity reserved for something unusual but inconvenient. In her third period class, a substitute named Mr. Halpern, late 40s, thin, permanently anxious after losing his previous job in a budget cut, played the video without sound for discussion, as if removing the audio removed the cruelty. Amara watched herself on the screen, small under the stage lights, frozen in that moment before sound existed, and she realized something unsettling. People weren't interested in what she could do, only in whether she deserved to try. That afternoon, an email arrived from Belmont, formal and polished, announcing updated performance guidelines, no religious music, strict repertoire approval, shortened time limits, and a panel expanded by Victor's associates. The door hadn't been closed. It had simply been narrowed until only certain people could pass through without turning sideways. Amara printed the email at the public library, and the paper warmed from the machine as if it had something to say that words couldn't carry. Sitting across from her was Jonah Price, a 17-year-old cellist with messy brown hair and a permanent slouch, someone who had once frozen mid-performance at a youth competition and never quite recovered from the silence that followed. He had seen the video too, of course, but unlike the others, he didn't smirk. "They're changing the rules," he said quietly, eyes scanning the page. "That usually means someone's scared." Amara didn't answer right away. She folded the paper carefully, aligning the edges as if precision could steady something inside her. "Maybe," she said. But deep down, she already knew fear had entered the room, just not where people thought. That night, back at New Mercy Church, the building breathed its familiar stillness. The wooden pews held on to old prayers, and the piano waited like it always had, imperfect, patient, honest. Amara sat, placed her fingers on the keys, and began the piece she had chosen, Victor Langston's signature concerto. The opening flowed easily, notes settling into place like memories she hadn't realized she'd stored. She had listened to recordings before, late at night, through borrowed headphones, memorizing not just the melody, but the structure, the intention behind each phrase. But now, playing it herself, something shifted, not in her technique, in the music. She stopped, played the passage again, slower. There it was, a transition, subtle, almost invisible, where the harmonic progression should have tightened, grown heavier, demanded more control. But instead, it resolved too easily, as if someone had softened the climb just before the peak. Amara frowned slightly, her fingers hovering. She wasn't confused. She was listening harder. She played the section again, isolating the notes, breaking them apart the way her mind always did, not seeing music as a line, but as a map. The pattern repeated, the same simplification, the same hidden ease. "It's not written that way," she whispered. From the back of the church, Brother Malcolm's voice drifted in, low and steady. "What isn't?" He had returned earlier to finish tuning, his coat draped over a pew, tools laid out like quiet instruments of their own. Amara didn't turn. "This part," she said, playing it once more. "It's supposed to be harder. It wants to go somewhere else." Malcolm walked closer, listening, his brow tightening. "You sure?" he asked. Amara nodded. "Not sure. Certain." Malcolm reached into his bag and pulled out a worn sheet. An older score, edges curled, ink slightly faded. "Original print," he said. "Not many of these left." He laid it open beside her. Amara scanned it, her eyes moving quickly, not reading in the traditional sense, but recognizing shapes, relationships, intent. And then she saw it. The original passage. More complex, less forgiving. No shortcut. Her fingers moved before she could think, playing it as written, and the sound changed immediately, denser, heavier, requiring more control, more truth. It didn't flatter the performer. It exposed them. Malcolm let out a slow breath. "Well, I'll be," he murmured. "That's not what Langston plays." Amara's hands rested on the keys. Silence filled the space between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of understanding arriving all at once. "He changed it," she said. Not a question, a realization. Malcolm didn't answer immediately. He had spent his life fixing instruments, not people, but he knew the difference between wear and intention. "Looks that way," he finally said. "Simplified the climb, kept the reputation." Amara stared at the sheet, then back at her hands. The humiliation at Belmont flickered through her memory, not as pain now, but as context. The laugh, the interruption, the certainty in Victor's voice. It wasn't just arrogance, it was protection. She played the original passage again, slower this time, letting each note settle where it belonged, no matter how difficult it was to hold. The music didn't hide anymore. It revealed, and in that moment Amara understood something that changed everything. If she played the version everyone knew, she might survive the stage. If she played the truth, she would change it. She closed the score gently, her fingers lingering on the edge of the page, and for the first time since Belmont, her heartbeat didn't tighten. It steadied, because the path ahead was no longer uncertain. It was simply harder, and she was no longer afraid of that. The night of the finals arrived under a sky so clear it felt indifferent, as if the world had decided to watch without choosing a side. Belmont Hall was full, every seat taken, every whisper sharpened by anticipation. The chandeliers glowed colder than before, their light no longer warm but precise, exposing every detail rather than flattering it. The stage looked the same, the Steinway polished to its usual perfection, but something in the air had shifted. It no longer felt like a performance space. It felt like a place where something would be decided. Victor Langston sat at the center of the judging panel, posture straight, expression composed, but his eyes moved differently tonight. He was still the same man, silver-haired, controlled, used to authority, but there was a subtle tension now, a calculation beneath the calm. The memory of the earlier round lingered somewhere behind his gaze, though he had not acknowledged it. To the audience, he remained untouchable. To himself, something had already begun to loosen. Backstage, Amara Hayes stood near the curtain, hands resting lightly at her sides. Her navy dress was the same one, pressed again, carefully, as if effort could restore dignity to fabric. She wasn't shaking, not anymore. The fear had passed days ago, replaced by something steadier, quieter. Not confidence, clarity. Near her sat Mrs. Eliza Grant, a late-60s adjudicator invited from a conservatory upstate, known for her strict standards and refusal to tolerate favoritism. Years earlier, she had resigned from a prestigious panel after witnessing a manipulated result, and since then, her reputation had shifted from respected to quietly feared. She had watched the rehearsal clips, read the updated rules, and said nothing. But she had not missed anything either. Now, as she adjusted her glasses and glanced toward Amara, there was no pity in her expression, only attention. "Your last before intermission," Mrs. Grant said simply. "That's not an accident." Amara nodded once. Across the room, Jonah Price tuned his cello absent-mindedly, and the bow trembling slightly in his hand, despite his efforts to steady it. He caught Amara's eye and gave a small nod. Not encouragement exactly, but recognition. He understood what it meant to walk onto a stage where the outcome had already been decided for you. "Amara Hayes," the announcer called. The curtain parted. The applause was polite, scattered, already fading before it had fully formed. Amara stepped onto the stage, and for a moment, the lights felt harsher than before, not brighter, just less forgiving. She walked to the piano without rushing, without hesitation, and sat. Victor leaned slightly forward, pen poised. "Your selection?" he asked into the microphone. Amara met his gaze. "Your concerto." A faint ripple moved through the audience. Victor smiled, not wide, controlled, ambitious. He leaned back. Amara placed her hands on the keys. The first notes came clean, controlled, familiar, exactly as expected. The version everyone knew, the version Victor had played for years, recorded, praised, repeated. Each phrase landed precisely where it should, and slowly, the tension in the room eased. Heads nodded, shoulders relaxed. Victor's pen began to move again across the page. Yes, this was what they understood. But Amara was not playing for understanding. She was listening. The transition approached, that fragile point where the music either revealed itself or hid again. Her fingers slowed, not enough for the untrained ear to notice. Just a fraction. A breath inside the rhythm. Victor's pen paused. Amara closed her eyes. And then she shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but the sound changed. The harmony deepened, the progression tightening, refusing the easy resolution. The notes no longer flowed comfortably. They demanded control, precision, truth. The original passage unfolded heavier, more complex, impossible to fake. A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Grant leaned forward, her hand stilling mid-note on her program. Jonah's bow stopped moving entirely. Victor sat upright, the pen slipped slightly in his fingers. Amara didn't look at anyone. Her hands moved steadily, each note placed exactly where it belonged. No hesitation, no apology. She wasn't correcting the music. She was restoring it. The further she went, the clearer it became. This was not interpretation. This was exposure. The piece climbed, sharper now, more demanding, each phrase stripping away the polished illusion that had made it famous. There was no space to hide inside this version, no softened edges, no controlled deception. Victor's jaw tightened. For the first time in years, he wasn't evaluating. He was listening, and he understood. The final passage approached, a sequence he had never played as written, not once, not in any performance. Amara moved into it without pause, her fingers steady, her control absolute. The sound filled the hall, not louder, but fuller, truth occupying space that had once been shaped by reputation. Then, the final chord. It landed, not softly, not dramatically, but completely. Silence followed, not confusion, recognition. No one moved, no one clapped, because in that moment, applause would have meant pretending nothing had changed. Victor didn't write, he didn't speak. He simply stared at the piano, then at Amara, as if trying to reconcile two versions of the same reality, and realizing only one of them could survive. Amara lifted her hands, stood. She didn't bow. She didn't wait. She stepped away from the piano and walked off stage, the silence still holding behind her like something fragile and irreversible. And for the first time that night, no one tried to fill it. The silence did not break. It stretched, thin and fragile, as if the entire hall feared that even a breath might shatter what had just been revealed. For several long seconds, no one moved. Then a chair scraped softly. Professor Adrian Keller stood up from the second row of the adjudication panel, a man in his early 60s with sharp features and a reputation for dismantling performances with surgical precision. Years ago, he had publicly challenged a world-class violinist for altering a classical piece, an act that cost him professional alliances but cemented his integrity. Since then, he had spoken less, but when he did, people listened. "Miss Hayes," he said, voice calm but carrying easily through the hall, "would you be willing to repeat the final passage?" A ripple moved through the audience. Not shock, not confusion, but something closer to anticipation. Amara had already reached the edge of the stage. She stopped, turned. There was no hesitation in her eyes now, only understanding. "Yes, sir." She walked back to the piano. This time, there was no announcement, no introduction, no expectation to meet. She sat, adjusted the bench slightly, and placed her hands on the keys again. The hall was quieter than before, if that was even possible. Amara began not from the start, but from the fracture itself. The passage unfolded slowly, deliberately, each note given space, not rushed, not softened. The complexity was undeniable now, not hidden within speed or masked by performance. It stood exposed, like architecture stripped of decoration, leaving only structure behind. Professor Keller stepped closer, listening not as a judge, but as a witness. Mrs. Eliza Grant lowered her glasses slightly, her gaze unwavering. Somewhere in the audience, a phone screen lit up, then another. Amara played through the sequence, every transition intact, every difficulty embraced rather than avoided. The weight of the original composition filled the hall, not louder, but heavier, honest. When she reached the final chord again, she held it just a fraction longer this time, then released. Silence followed. But this silence was different. It was no longer uncertain. It was confirming. Professor Keller turned slowly toward the panel. "May we?" he asked. Without waiting for formal permission, he gestured to the technician near the side of the stage. A recording began to play. Victor Langston's performance. Perfect. Polished. Familiar. The same passage approached. The same transition. And then, the difference. Subtle, but now impossible to ignore. Where Amara's version tightened, Victor's eased. Where hers demanded control, his resolved comfortably. Where hers revealed, his concealed. A murmur spread through the hall, low at first, then building. Not chaotic, but undeniable. Heads leaned toward one another. Programs shifted. Eyes moved, not toward Amara now, but toward Victor. At the center of it all, he remained seated. Still, for a moment too long. Then he stood. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but without the ease he once carried. The microphone was in front of him. The room waited. Victor Langston, who had spent decades controlling narrative, tone, expectation, opened his mouth. Nothing came. His eyes moved briefly toward the piano, then toward Amara, then somewhere else entirely, as if searching for a version of this moment that still belonged to him. There wasn't one. He closed his mouth, stepped back, and in that small, almost invisible retreat, everything shifted. The applause, when it finally came, was not immediate. It built slowly, unevenly, as if people were still deciding what they were applauding, for the performance, for the truth, or for the courage it took to let one replace the other. Amara stood beside the piano, not bowing, not claiming anything. She had not come to win. And somehow, that made what followed inevitable. The official results were announced later, but they felt distant, almost irrelevant. Names were read, scores were given, titles assigned. Amara's name was not called first. It didn't matter, because by then, the room had already chosen. As she walked off the stage for the final time, no one stopped her, no one redirected her, no one tried to define what she had just done. Outside, the night air felt different, colder, sharper, but clearer somehow. Jonah stood near the exit, hands in his pockets. "You didn't just play," he said quietly. "You changed something." Amara looked back once, not at the building, not at the lights, but at the silence she had left behind. "I just listened," she said. And somewhere inside Belmont Hall, something that had been carefully maintained for years, quietly, had broken, not loudly, not completely, but enough that it could never return to what it was before. In the end, the miracle in the story did not arrive with thunder or spectacle. It came quietly, like a truth whispered into the heart of someone willing to listen. That is often how God works, not through noise, but through clarity, through courage, through the unseen moments that shape who we become. Amara did not win because she was the loudest. She did not win because she was chosen. She won because she stayed true to what she heard, even when the world tried to silence her. And in our own lives, there will be moments like that, moments where we are overlooked, misunderstood, stopped before we even begin. But that does not mean our voice has no value. It only means the right moment has not yet come. God sees what others miss. God hears what others ignore. So don't rush. Don't force yourself to fit where you were never meant to belong. And don't lose your truth just to be accepted. Because when your moment comes, truth does not need permission to be heard. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope today. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been judged before you were truly seen? If you believe in stories about faith, strength, and purpose, take a moment to subscribe so we can keep spreading light together. May God bless you, protect your path, and give you strength in every silent battle you are fighting.
If this touched you, say something in the comment. Tell us where you're from and follow Hidden Black Tail for more real stories.